The ranger's boot splashed into the freezing mud as he dropped to his knees. His flashlight beam trembled over the motionless forms. A child, barely older than a toddler, arms wrapped around two unresponsive bear cubs. The snow whipped around them like a blizzard from hell, but Eli didn't flinch. His lips were blue, his fingers stiff, but his arms, locked around those cubs, told the story. He had shielded them with the last warmth his tiny body could offer. "Dear God," the ranger choked out, "we found them." The other ranger knelt beside him, pressing two fingers to Eli's neck. "Faint pulse. He's alive. Get the evac team. Now!" The radio crackled violently as the ranger's voice fought the wind and panic. "This is Ranger Post Delta. We've got a baby and two bears, barely breathing. We're bringing them in. I repeat, this is a triple code red. Prepare for medical evac." As the emergency crew rushed in, a wave of horror washed across the team's faces. These weren't just victims. They were survivors of something unspeakable. One ranger tried to pry Eli's arms apart, but the child wouldn't let go, even unconscious. A medic had to carefully ease one hand away to get to his chest. "They're ice cold," one paramedic said of the cubs, "but there's shallow breath. Still a chance. Let's move." The blare of the rescue helicopter cut through the sky like a war cry. A ranger climbed in with Eli clutched to his chest, his other hand cradling one of the cubs. Another team member followed with the second. Nobody spoke during the ascent. There was nothing to say, just a heartbeat, just breath. That was all they prayed for. The town clinic wasn't built for this. The moment the chopper blades stopped spinning, a wave of organized chaos swallowed the night. Nurses sprinted toward the landing zone with stretchers. A vet, hastily pulled from his home, arrived in his pajamas. He gasped when he saw the cubs, mud-caked, barely moving, shivering with eyes shut. "They'll need IVs, heat pads, everything we've got," he barked. "Where's the pediatric trauma team for the child?" Eli was rushed through the side doors. A nurse attempted to remove his tattered jacket but hesitated when she saw what was inside. Twigs stuffed into holes to block the wind, his own scarf torn and tied around the smaller cub's neck like a makeshift blanket. "He used everything he had to protect them," she whispered, voice trembling. "Even when he had nothing." Doctors scrambled to stabilize his temperature, insert fluids, and assess the damage. One nurse sobbed as she worked, wiping her tears with the back of her glove. "He wouldn't stop protecting them," she whispered to no one in particular. "He dragged them through hell." In the adjacent emergency room, the cubs lay under heating lamps. The vet worked furiously, intubating, flushing their systems, massaging their tiny chests to stimulate circulation. One cub whimpered faintly. It was enough to bring the vet to his knees. "They're fighters," he muttered. "Just like the boy." Meanwhile, Eli's monitor beeped uncertainly. His oxygen levels dipped, surged, dipped again. The lead doctor clenched his jaw. "He's hanging by a thread. We need a miracle." Outside, more ambulances rolled in. Rescuers, wildlife officers, trauma specialists. Word was spreading. By sunrise, the story had already broken. A local firefighter, overwhelmed by what he had seen, posted a single photo. Eli, unconscious, cradling the two cubs on the forest floor, snow swirling around them. Within minutes, it exploded. Eli the Protector started trending. News anchors wept live on air as they read the headline, "Abandoned Baby Found Protecting Two Buried Alive Bear Cubs in Blizzard." The rescue footage, raw, unfiltered, showed Eli's frostbitten fingers still curled around the cubs as medics worked on him. Another clip showed a ranger pulling off his own jacket to wrap around the smallest cub, whispering, "You're safe now, little one." Social media erupted with disbelief, sorrow, awe. "I can't believe this baby risked everything to save animals," one tweet read. "He's a hero before he can even talk." "It broke me," another said. "I watched that video and just sobbed." Soon, the clinic parking lot was flooded, not just with media vans but with people. Locals held candles. Children made signs. An elderly woman showed up with hand-knitted scarves for the cubs and a teddy bear for Eli. Wildlife Services released a public statement offering full support and launching an investigation into how the cubs and Eli ended up in that state. Activist groups demanded justice. The governor of the state arrived in person and addressed the cameras. This child is a symbol of everything we hope humanity could be. He protected the vulnerable, at the cost of his own safety. We owe him more than just recovery. We owe him a future. People started donating. Funds for Eli's medical care, funds for wildlife rehabilitation. A small-town clinic turned into the heart of a global movement overnight. Inside, the hospital staff could barely believe what was unfolding beyond their doors. But all of it meant nothing, unless Eli woke up. The machines beeped steadily now. After hours of battling death, Eli's vitals had begun to stabilize. His body was warming. His lungs were clearing. But his eyes remained closed, his small form still motionless under a mountain of blankets. The vet entered the pediatric ICU and approached Eli's bed with the tiniest of the cubs in his arms. She was no longer unconscious, but weak, very weak. He glanced at the nurse and said, "Just for a moment." He gently placed the cub next to Eli on the bed. As soon as her fur brushed against him, something stirred. Eli's fingers twitched, then his lips. A soft murmur escaped, barely audible. "Boo-boo." The heart monitor blipped faster. A nurse cried out, "He's responding." Eli's eyes fluttered open, just for a second. His gaze fell on the cub nestled against him. His hand moved weakly to touch her fur. "She's okay," he whispered. That was all he needed. Outside the window, the sky began to brighten. For the first time in days, the snow had stopped. The air felt softer, warmer. The storm had passed. And inside that tiny clinic by the hospital staff was padding around her enclosure with cautious curiosity. Her brother, larger and more defensive, kept close to her, always placing himself between her and strangers. Their wounds closed, their fur thickened. Their bodies regained warmth, but something was missing. They flinched at unfamiliar sounds, refused to eat unless Eli was nearby. Boo would whimper at night until someone played the recording of Eli humming, a melody he'd made up during their time in the storm. "They're physically recovering," the vet said, kneeling by the glass window of the rehabilitation room. "But mentally, emotionally, they're adrift." The cubs would climb onto Eli when he visited, curling up against his legs like puppies. He'd sit there, quietly, stroking their fur. He still hadn't spoken since waking up. Not a word, but his eyes said everything. And the cubs listened. "I've never seen anything like this," the vet murmured to a reporter. "He's become their anchor, their safe place. But even he can't give them what they're crying for." "What's that?" the reporter asked. "Their mother." The search parties began with only a thread of hope. Footprints, blood trails, a bent pine branch where something large had leaned against it. Rangers followed it all, scanning ravines, hollows, frostbitten trails. Every time they thought they'd lost the trail, someone would spot another sign, claw marks on bark, half-eaten berries in the snow. "She's still moving," one ranger said, "but she's hurt bad." They hiked for days through snow, mud, and silence. The cold was brutal, and morale wore thin. The crew began taking turns reading messages from schoolchildren who'd sent in letters for Eli and the cubs, every word reigniting the fire in their hearts. Then, one morning, as sunlight broke across a frozen ridge, a voice crackled over the ranger's radio. "We found her, injured, but alive." She had dug herself a crude den beneath the base of an old tree. Her leg was bent unnaturally, fur matted with dried blood. But she growled low when the ranger approached, and when they held out a cloth carrying the cub's scent, her eyes changed. Recognition, awareness, desperation. "She smelled them," the ranger whispered. "She knows." The reunion was carefully planned. A secured natural enclosure was prepared, large enough for movement but guarded enough to ensure safety. The mother bear, sedated just enough to calm her fear, was brought to the far side and slowly released. Cameras rolled silently. Everyone held their breath. Then the cubs were brought in, one at a time. Boo stepped into the grass first, hesitating. She sniffed the wind. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then her soft, trembling cry pierced the air. The response was instant. The mother bear let out a guttural, aching roar that stopped every heart within earshot. It wasn't rage, it wasn't fear. It was something deeper, primordial, a sound born from pain, love, and relief all at once. She stumbled forward, dragging her wounded leg, eyes locked on the shapes that once nursed beside her. The second cub cried out too, running to her as fast as his still recovering body would allow. The mother bear collapsed just shy of reaching them, too weak to stand, but her nose met theirs. She licked their faces, nudged them. They buried themselves into her fur, as if trying to crawl back inside the safety of her body. On the other side of the enclosure, Eli stood watching, holding Boo's old scarf in his hands. His body was still small, his skin pale, but his face was calm now, peaceful. A tear slipped down his cheek. He wasn't crying out of sadness. It was relief, understanding. They were whole again. News footage of the reunion swept across every major network. Reporters couldn't contain their own emotions as they narrated the story now being called The Miracle in the Snow. Baby saves bear cubs and inspires a global awakening. Viral posts turned into petitions. Protests against animal cruelty surged. Donations skyrocketed, not just for Eli, but for wildlife rescues around the world. Celebrities offered to fund expansions for the small-town clinic that had treated the cubs. Children everywhere sent letters and drawings, some saying they wanted to grow up to be just like Eli. The governor returned to the hospital with an announcement. "We are establishing a new sanctuary, one that will protect animals, heal the injured, and tell Eli's story for generations. It will be called Eli's Promise." The crowd erupted in applause. At the naming ceremony, Eli stood beside the vet and the rangers, holding a carved wooden bear someone had gifted him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes locked with the two cubs, now romping through a field of wildflowers inside the sanctuary fence. He smiled. They were safe, and that had always been enough. Years passed. The world moved on. But Eli's story never disappeared. Every spring, new families visited Eli's Promise to learn about kindness, courage, and the bond between species. His image, tiny, bundled in snow, holding two bear cubs, became an international symbol of compassion, but Eli himself stayed quiet. He grew into a thoughtful, observant child, still not speaking, still watching the world like he was waiting for something only he could hear. And then, on a soft summer morning, a moment arrived. Eli, now tall, about 12, stood before the enclosure fence. A tour group was behind him, but he barely noticed. His eyes were on the bear. She was massive now, majestic, her fur glossy and thick, but when she saw him, she paused mid-step. Recognition sparked. She rumbled softly and moved closer to the glass. Slowly, gently. She raised one enormous paw and placed it on the barrier between them. Eli blinked. His breath caught, and for the first time in his life he lifted his hand to match hers, palm to paw. The bear didn't move. Neither did he. Then, softly, quietly, so quietly the guide almost didn't hear it, Eli whispered, "Safe." The bear blinked, nudged the glass, and just like that, the world tilted on its axis again. The guide gasped. One of the tourists dropped their phone. But no one moved. No one dared interrupt what was happening. Eli turned to the vet who had appeared behind him. Tears welled in the man's eyes. "You waited until they were okay, didn't you?" he asked. Eli just smiled, because the promise had been kept. The cubs were safe. And now, So was he.